Welcome to Buried Secrets, a podcast about the paranormal, the occult, and weird and forgotten history. I'm Chris. This episode, I am back talking about Randonautica. I want to talk about some of the ideas of memetics that are tied in with Randonautica. I want to talk about this concept called the despair meme, which is something that comes up with folks while randonauting sometimes. And then I want to talk about some more of my own experiences with Randonautica and potentially with the despair meme. And the experiences I'm going to talk about this episode are all to do with the Hell Gate. If you're a longtime listener, you know that I did some episodes at the end of 2020 all about the Hell Gate and its history and some of the terrible things that have happened there. And I've been obsessed with that supposedly very haunted area for a while. And I realized when I was working on this series and collecting my notes that some of my unsettling experiences at the Hell Gate sort of are tied in with some of the things that have happened while I've been using Randonautica in the neighborhood. So I'll talk more about that at the end of the episode. But first, just in case you are jumping in here in this series and haven't listened to the first two episodes, Randonautica is a free app that you can download on your phone. It uses algorithms, quantum thingies, to send you to a point within a radius that you set. And typically a lot of unusual things happen. If you have set an intention, you might encounter things related to your intention. You might encounter synchronicities, both on your way to the point and at the point. And if you want to know more about how the app works, you should listen to the first episode in this series where I talk a lot more about that. So let's get into it. Let's talk about memetics. This is a concept that I still struggle to understand, but it's been popping up in a lot of different things that I've been reading, not just about randonauting, but in the book, The Official Guide to Randonautica, which I've been referencing throughout this series, there is a decent amount of stuff about memetics, which has some bearing on randonauting, so I want to spend some time with the idea here. So first, let's get the obvious out of the way. I don't know about you, but the first thing I think of when I hear memetics is memes. I think everyone listening to this podcast knows what internet memes are, probably, but just in case, I would describe memes as a popular format of telling jokes online, where text is placed on top of an image to convey a message that's typically funny. You'll see the same images circulating over and over with different text superimposed. You can check out the website Know Your Meme if you want to see a bunch of memes and some history of the memes and all of that. If you don't know what I'm talking about, you can check that out. But as I was researching memes and memetics, I learned that the images that we typically call memes online are really more accurately described as image macros. So they're more like a subtype of internet meme, and technically you could consider anything that's going viral as a meme, like a phrase or idea or video, or even a creepypasta like Slender Man. So if an internet meme is something that's spread through the internet, a meme is basically the same thing, just not necessarily online. So looking at the idea of memetics, I'm going to start out real basic with the Wikipedia definition, which is, memetics is the study of information and culture based on an analogy with Darwinian evolution. Proponents describe memetics as an approach to evolutionary models of cultural information transfer. Memetics describes how an idea can propagate successfully, but it doesn't necessarily imply a concept is factual. Honestly, I don't know about you, I hear the phrase cultural information transfer, and my eyes kind of glaze over. But basically, a meme is something that spreads information, behavior, styles, symbols, practices, or ideas, and memetics is looking at the spread of memes through a sort of evolutionary lens. The word meme was originally coined in the 1976 book The Selfish Gene by Richard Dawkins, the delightful public intellectual who brought us new atheism. To be clear, I'm being sarcastic. I am not a fan of Richard Dawkins. But basically, his idea was that a meme is like a mental gene. Get it? Like meme, gene, they kind of rhyme. I assume that's where he got that. I don't know. But it's like a mental gene in that it's a unit of culture that is, quote, hosted in people's brains, and it can spread between their brains. So what does that mean? He gives the example of a tune that you can hum as a meme. Someone's humming the tune, and then it gets stuck in someone else's head, etc. So it's spread. It seems that Dawkins doesn't really see internet memes as true memes because they are, to quote Wikipedia again, deliberately altered by human creativity, distinguished from his original idea involving mutation, quote, by random change in a form of Darwinian selection. This is all pretty twisty, to me at least, but you're probably seeing how memetics has some connections to synchronicity, right? Like, it's in that same zone. And unsurprisingly, the group of folks who inspired the creation of Randonautica were some researchers, or as the official guide to Randonautica calls them, mad scientists who studied memetics. The book talks about how you can read memes as an archetypal expression, which brings up Jung's ideas again, right? Like archetypes and stuff. And they theorize that you could read the general collective unconscious based on what's bubbling up in randonauting journeys, which I think is really interesting. So to read a bit from the official guide to Randonautica, the memes that emerge through Randonautica represent a global mythos based around curiosity. Although synchronicity is extremely personal and strikes to the very core of who you are, it turns out it can be a shared experience. People from around the globe often report the same synchronous experiences, which in turn are shared as memes and turn into legends if they become popular enough. These legends are folk tales that arise through curiously exploring the void and emerge to the collective unconscious. So that's a really interesting idea, I think. So next, let's talk about the despair meme. So I'll read a definition of what this is from the official guide to Randonautica. The despair meme is the visceral physiological reaction that some people have at the prospect of going to a random place, or even a fear of uncertainty in general. Since that random place is totally disconnected from any prior events in your life, your brain is attempting to predict what will happen when you get there. This response to uncertainty can cause some people to feel fear or anxiety, even manifesting as a projection of their worst fears. Sometimes at the mere prospect of going to an unknown location, people start to feel nauseated and sick or dizzy. So that really struck a chord with me when I read that, because I have had my own experiences that kind of have that despair meme vibe. So last time, or maybe the time before that, I talked about how sometimes I do have a strong reaction to randonauting. And sometimes I do get this big sense of anxiety. And I think about randonauting, you know, I'm going on a run anyway, maybe I can go randonaut while I'm running or whatever. And I just get this feeling like, no, I don't want to do it. I shouldn't do it. I'm not going to do it. Now, the book suggests that you push through that feeling, and I think your mileage may vary with that technique. Usually when I get this despair meme feeling, I give Randonautica a rest for a while until I feel better about using it. That's because I don't see the point in forcing myself to do something that I'm just doing for fun. Like, nothing bad is going to happen if I don't randonaut, if I just, go for a walk, like a normal walk or a normal run or whatever. I'm just doing it for fun, and I always know that I'll return to randonauting whenever it feels right again. Also, personally, I am not neurotypical, and sometimes I do have a lot of anxiety about breaking my routine, especially if I'm worn down or stressed about something else already. And I know that when I force myself into a situation where I'm piling anxiety over already feeling bad, I'll just feel worse. Like some people can push through things, but definitely for someone of my particular neurotype, it definitely is not good to push through things most of the time, and it's usually best to just, give things a rest, I'll feel better soon, etc. But of course, you know what's best for you in the situation, everyone's different. Now, I didn't know about this idea of the despair meme until I read the official guide to Randonautica in January 2022, so a couple months ago, but I'd been using Randonautica for almost 2 years at that point, so I was surprised to see that other people had encountered this feeling of dread. But reading about it also made me feel better and less alone, and what I had felt like was kind of an extreme reaction even for me. Like, it made me feel a little bit less weird and like I was overreacting or having, this strange emotion out of nowhere, whatever. So while looking at the despair meme, I want to talk about a weird set of experiences that I had that may or may not have some overlap with the despair meme. Let's talk about the Hellgate. The Hellgate is a tidal strait in the East River, sort of in that area around Astoria, Roosevelt Island, and the Upper East Side, and part of the Bronx. It is a very troubled place, as you can guess from the name, and it used to be an incredibly dangerous place to pass through if you were on a ship. Back in late 2020, like I mentioned, I did a series of episodes about the Hellgate here in New York City and its general, like environs and surrounding areas like Roosevelt Island, etc. I did an episode about the lighthouse on Roosevelt Island, the tip of Roosevelt Island, which is, kind of around where the Hellgate begins. I did an episode about a fort that a lunatic had built in the place where the lighthouse is now, which was also on, the edge of the Hellgate, on the tip of Roosevelt Island. And then going a little bit north over along the East River, I did an episode about a ship called the Hussar, which sank during the Revolutionary War with a supposedly payroll in the form of a ton of gold on this ship. And it sank. Some American prisoners who had been tied up or chained up in the lower decks of the ship died, and then the British military people who were on the boat survived. And, so that was a British warship in the Revolutionary War, and many people in the years since have tried to find the Hussar and tried to find its gold. So there's kind of a treasure hunt aspect to the Hellgate. At one point, the Hellgate, this area of the East River was so dangerous that, if I'm remembering correctly, more than 1,000 ships ran aground there every year. So it was just like a constant place of shipwrecks and ships being damaged and people dying, or if not dying, just having these really stressful experiences of, hitting a reef, etc. Then later, the Army Corps of Engineers blew up parts of the Hellgate. So they tunneled underneath the East River. They blew up parts of this tidal strait where the reefs were the worst and, where ships were running aground the most often. And so there was this like moment of almost like psychic scarring. Like it was the biggest explosion in history until the atomic bomb. So, that is a traumatic thing to have happened in that area. And then in the early 20th century, there was the worst disaster at the Hellgate, which was when the General Slocum, a steamship that a church group had rented out for a trip in 1904, sank. And between 1,000 and 1,300 people died. That was the largest loss of life in New York City until 9/11. And there are a lot of horrific pictures of bodies washing onto shore in that area. So with all this in mind, of course, the Hellgate is said to be haunted, though I haven't found as many stories about the area's hauntings as I would like to have found. It seems that it's mostly urban legends, which are fun and interesting, but not particularly convincing. So if you want to know more about the Hellgate, I also have episodes about, I've got an episode about the Hussar, about the Slocum, and then about just some of the urban legends and hauntings associated with the Hellgate. So you can check out those episodes from the end of 2020 if you want to know more. But basically, since 2020, I've been fascinated by the Hellgate. But at the same time, I've been sort of repelled by it, often without realizing it. And I guess to clarify, I have no problem visiting some parts of the Queens waterfront alongside the Hellgate. I have no problem visiting Roosevelt Island. For some reason, I seem to have a problem visiting Astoria Park, which is a waterfront park here in Queens, right along the Hellgate. The Hellgate Bridge is there, so a lot of the stories of the hauntings and the urban legends are surrounding Astoria Park for whatever reason. So I had a weird experience at Astoria Park by the water in spring 2020, where basically I was there and suddenly I felt extremely upset and uncomfortable and I wanted to leave, which is just weird and unlike me. I'm not someone with moods that kind of like change and shift very quickly and then go away quickly. And I like to be out and about alone. That's not usually something that bothers me, but I just had this feeling where I was like, I gotta get out of here. I gotta get home. It was really weird. And that happened kind of early on in the pandemic. And if I'm being honest, I didn't really self-reflect a lot after that. I kind of just swept that under the rug and was like, ooh, maybe there was something paranormal at work that made me feel so uncomfortable. And then I was kind of like, maybe not. I have no proof. And I kind of just laughed it off a little bit, maybe, and kind of dismissed my own experience there a little bit. So since then, other strange stuff has happened to me by the Hellgate, and I realized that I often leave the Hellgate feeling very upset. Usually there's no reason for me to be upset, and I actually didn't even notice that I have a tendency to get very upset when I'm at Astoria Park by the Hellgate. I didn't notice, and my wife actually pointed it out to me. Where she was like, why do you keep going there? You always get so upset. And it's true, like I get upset there, and then by the time, I get close to home, I start feeling totally fine again. And the Hellgate's the only place that really seems to happen to me. And it's been happening since April 2020, at least. Though I really didn't spend much time at Astoria Park prior to the pandemic. So who knows? Maybe I was staying away from it without thinking about it. So like I said, there's not usually a clear reason for me to be upset when I leave the Hellgate. But I did have one weird experience where there was sort of a freak accident that happened right after I did an Estes session at Astoria Park down by the waters of the Hellgate. So I feel like I gotta talk about that. And this all does have something to do with Randonautica. I'll just get around to it towards the end of this story. So, in the end of August 2021, I did a solo Estes session, like I said, down by the waters of the Hellgate at Astoria Park. This was the first Estes session that I had done there. I got some pretty interesting responses, and I was fairly happy with how that session went. But the most memorable thing about that day was that on my walk home, a manhole cover on the street right next to me blew up in flames. It was a Con Edison manhole, so I assume it was an electrical fire because they're, the electric and gas company. And the flames were pretty high, probably a couple feet high, and the manhole cover kept bouncing up and down as the flames came and went. I don't know if you heard that on the recording, but just as I was saying that, I heard something that sounded like not a car backfiring, but maybe like a loud banging noise. That's just kind of funny. And that's not a sound I hear super often here. Anyway, it was making loud explosion noises. It was in the middle of the street, really, I guess the side of the street by the sidewalk. It was like, I was maybe like 10 feet away from it when this was happening. This was pretty early on a Saturday morning, so not many people were around. And the people who were around just did the New York City thing and ignored it. But there was a fire. And, I was right by several large residential apartment buildings where people were clearly still asleep. So I was the one who had to call 911 to get the fire department to come put out the fire. Luckily, they came pretty quickly. And to my knowledge, no one was hurt. And they were able to put it out. But there was a lot of smoke and tons of emergency vehicles. And I've mentioned this on the podcast before, but I am very uncomfortable around fire and probably have a bit of a phobia about fire. Because in 2019, the building next to the one we lived in at the time in Astoria burned down. And I spent hours watching the fire department try to put out the fire and, wondering whether the fire was going to spread to our building since, the building's walls touched. Luckily, the building I lived in at the time was brick and it was mostly fine, though the smoke smell lingered for months and the fire department did do a little bit of damage in the building, and it was a fairly traumatic experience. Also, last I checked, I haven't been back there in a month or so, but last I checked, the building that burned down is still just like an empty husk. So I also spent like 2 years living next to an empty husk that was just burned out and boarded up. So I don't like fire. I don't like freak accidents. Obviously, no one does. But, that was the second fire-related incident where the fire department was called that I was there for. in a couple years, so I was very unhappy about that. And I was probably a little bit more upset than an average person would be at encountering open flames in the middle of the street. Then, on my way home, I ran into a friend of mine who I had plans to hang out with later that afternoon, which I mentioned just because it was kind of a strange coincidence. Like, obviously, I have a number of friends in the neighborhood, but it was kind of weird to, do this Estes session at the Hellgate while I was walking home, have this weird freak accident with fire and have to call the fire department, and then run into a friend, kind of in quick succession. And, I don't think this is the manhole fire's fault, or perhaps even the Hellgate's fault, but that day sort of marked a turning point last year, where things in my life had been going in a certain direction, and then after that morning, that specific morning in August, things took a bit of a turn. I'm not going to go into a ton of detail, and not everything in my life that changed was bad. There's a number of good things that have happened since then. But just to give you an example of what I'm talking about, so for example, I later learned that right around that time, unbeknownst to me, some stuff was put into motion that would result in me being laid off from my job a few months later. The company I was at ended up having a restructuring, and it turns out that some of the things in the restructuring started right around then in August. So, that timing's notable to me. And like I said, there were also some good things that happened around that time. But when I think of the last year or so, kind of in retrospect, thinking about how things have changed, how I've grown, or both good and uncomfortable things that have happened, etc., that time, and specifically that day, feels like a bit of a pivot point for a lot of things in my life. And it just feels like something changed. In retrospect, I would almost describe the feeling as being as if on a summer day, the temperature suddenly dropped and standing water around me started freezing. So then I look around and I'm feeling pretty unsettled because it's summer and suddenly it's freezing. And as I head home to get a coat and dress and prepare for the new weather and kind of strange weather, I look around and no one else can see it. They don't feel the drop in the temperature. They don't see puddles freezing over. They don't need a coat. And I'm experiencing a winter day, but they're still experiencing a beautiful summer day. The metaphor is imperfect, but that's how it felt. It was as if something was off, and that something was external to me. But even though it somehow felt external to me, other people couldn't notice it or didn't notice it. And who knows, maybe the reason why the metaphor of, standing in the street while something has changed and no one notices, maybe that metaphor just comes, and that feeling just comes from me reacting to seeing open flames in the street and other people walking by as if they just weren't there, and then, I was the one who had to do something about it, etc. And as I was writing the script for this and, gathering my notes for this and thinking about all of this, I almost started to wonder if I could interpret that as being a sort of initiation experience, because it does feel like I crossed a threshold that day. I don't know what kind of threshold, but after that, things felt almost dreamlike for a while. Obviously the rest of the day, I was in a daze and was very upset. I'm sure some of that was a trauma type response, because like I said, I really, really don't like fire. And, I went out that afternoon and was basically I can't be outside. I have to go lie back down, etc. But things felt strange and dreamlike. For example, and of course this is not about me, but for example, a few days later, there was a freak storm and a number of people either died or lost everything in Queens, Queens where I live. And like I said, the storm has nothing to do with me. It's not about me, but it just felt really strange to encounter two somewhat dystopian environmental dangers in the space of less than a week. I was just like, what the heck is going on? And while the fire and the storm really made me feel like, I was like, has the apocalypse started? What's going on? And luckily, a lot of the environmental stuff, there weren't more environmental disasters here in the neighborhood piled on top of that in quick succession. It was just those two things that week. And the manhole cover, it doesn't seem like anyone was hurt, but still was freaky. But aside from those two things, I don't think I really realized all the stuff that was like at work and happening at that time, and like all the things in my life that changed. And it's only a pattern that I can see in retrospect. But when I look back at it, I really see it. And it's interesting, I was talking to my wife about this and I was like, late August when so many things changed. And she kind of like looked at me and she was like, I don't know what you're talking about. Like nothing changed. So I think there's also something to be said for like the interpretation that we put on events in our own lives, right? Like to me, that was like a huge turning point, and a bunch of things got like better and a bunch of things got worse, right? About then. But it was like very, I guess, close to me, like very internal, even though it felt to me external, like some external force was at work, like rearranging things in my life. Even, someone as close to me as my wife is kind of like, I don't really know what you're talking about. So, I think that says a lot about the meaning we can give things in our lives, etc. But as much as it is my own interpretation of things, I really do feel like pretty convinced of my own interpretation of these events, right? So at this point, after the manhole cover explosion and the solo Estes session at the park, I sort of had some baggage around the park. And, I did some more solo Estes sessions there, but when I went on runs, I tried to avoid the park. Not consciously. I was just running to other places because I liked them better. And that wasn't a lie I was telling myself. Like, I was just like, I just prefer to run in these other areas. Now, of course, you might wonder why I would like running through the large, beautiful park less than running through crowded sidewalks during a pandemic. And that's kind of what I'm getting at here when I'm saying it's a little bit weird that I was unconsciously avoiding the park. And as I mentioned before, I often randonaut while going on runs. So I would set the radius of, the Randonaut app so that Astoria Park would not be included in the area. And again, it would choose a point that was close to the outer edge of the radius, and that was the closest that it could get to Astoria Park, given the distance I had allowed. So without really reflecting on it, and this happened a handful of times, without really reflecting on it, I would run to the point. I wouldn't really see much of anything at the point, and I would think, oh, well, I'm right near the park. I should run in the park since I'm here already. I'm like a block away or like 3 blocks away or whatever. So then I would do that, and again, partway through the run through the park, I would get this really awful feeling. It's hard to explain, but I would get in there and I'd just feel extremely lonely and demoralized and awful. And if I had to choose one word to describe it, I would say I was probably feeling despair. However, at the time, I didn't really notice I was feeling that way consistently when going to the park. I think I've mentioned this before. I'm not always the best at observing and, noticing my own emotions. A lot of the time, it has to be pointed out to me. So finally, in October, I believe, I was doing a solo Estes session in the park, and I suddenly started feeling really deeply depressed. It came on really suddenly while I was there, and it was just very extreme, and it just felt awful. Once I was done with the session, I went home, and once I got home, I felt better pretty much right away. And as I was telling my wife about it, she said, oh, that makes sense because you always feel depressed when you go to that park. And, until that point, when she pointed it out, I had not made that connection. But then I thought back to the prior year and a half, especially during some of the stricter COVID lockdowns, when, it would have been nice to go for walks in the park. After feeling this despair in the park in April 2020, my wife often tried to get me to go on walks with her to Astoria Park because it's a beautiful park, but I always found some excuse for why I couldn't go. I wasn't consciously avoiding it, but in retrospect, I was definitely and obviously avoiding it. And it's even weirder when you consider that during late 2020, I got really, really obsessed with the Hellgate and did a bunch of episodes about it. And, I am still obsessed with the Hellgate. So after realizing this, I now try not to go to the park alone. Or if I do, I try to bike through rather than running or walking. Or I walk through while talking on the phone or whatever. It seems fine if I bike in and out of there quickly or if I'm with someone else. I don't seem to get despair if I'm not alone in that park. Though when I'm walking, running, or sitting there alone, this deep feeling of despair and like depression creeps in really quickly. So, to bring this back to Randonautica, I think it's very odd that the app tended to send me there again and again, and I had a similar experience of despair each time. So, was it sending me there because I was obsessed with it? So, was thinking about it in the back of my mind, accidentally influencing my intention? Or was it sending me there for another reason? Also, does this have to do with the despair meme? On face value, it seems like maybe not, since the despair meme is about the fear of uncertainty. But if there's something strange going on at the Hellgate from perhaps a paranormal perspective, maybe there's some uncertainty or strangeness there that's disturbing me when I go there. And I don't consider myself a particularly sensitive person. My wife is much more sensitive than I am, and she never, feels bad at Astoria Park. So it's interesting that I have that reaction. And, I don't know, maybe there's just something about the phrase despair meme that makes me think, okay, yeah, I feel like I could be experiencing the despair meme when I go to that park. And I think that's because the depression I feel when I'm in the area of Astoria Park feels, like I said, like it comes from outside of me. Usually I get the sense that my feelings originate from something going on in my brain, something I'm thinking about or I'm fixated on, or something that another person did or said to me. But in this case, I can't help feeling like something non-human and external to me is influencing me in a way that is invisible to me, aside from the terrible feeling I get when I go there. And like I said, it's like this feeling just appears, it's very intense, and that to me feels almost meme-like, right? If memes are ideas spreading between people, I wonder if memes can be spread by ghosts. My first impulse is to say that maybe I am being influenced by being in this supposedly haunted area. And, it's interesting that I get this feeling only when I'm alone. Is it possible that when I linger there and I'm not in the presence of another corporeal person, am I picking up a despair meme from some sort of paranormal entity? Either a ghost or just like some spirit or entity associated with that location, whether or not it ever was a human? Seems like maybe. And I do want to acknowledge that I could be unknowingly be experiencing other factors that are making me feel this way. So here's the debunkings I could think of. So maybe I feel sad there because I know that a lot of people died near there. Maybe I'm experiencing some sort of trauma response related to the manhole fire explosion. Maybe I'm having some sort of weird reaction to an environmental factor. There's a power plant nearby, there's a water treatment plant across the river from there, maybe something's going on there. And my responses to those three potential debunkings are that one, okay, this being sad because a lot of people died somewhere, sure, but I know a lot of places in New York City where people died. I go to cemeteries all the time. I have worked in places that, I used to work a couple blocks away from the World Trade Center. It's not unusual for me to be somewhere where a bunch of people died and for me to be very familiar with that history, and that I don't usually have any kind of sensitivity to that. So is it a trauma response related to the manhole fire explosion? Maybe, but that doesn't explain why I felt bad about the park and avoided it prior to that explosion. And could it be pollution from the power plant that's, making me feel uneasy or uncomfortable, whatever? Again, maybe. However, there's a couple power plants in the neighborhood, and I spend much more time next to this other power plant, also on the Queens waterfront. And that power plant definitely aggravates my asthma, for sure. But I've never felt despair while walking by that power plant. Or at least not the kind of despair I'm talking about here. I definitely feel despair about, the pollution giving everyone in the neighborhood asthma and how terrible the peaker plant at that location is, etc. But that's different. So to me, because I have a pretty, to me, solid answer to each of the debunkings I could think of, I really do feel like there's a more paranormal aspect that I'm experiencing there, especially because I don't have an issue there if I'm not alone. If it was pollution, wouldn't I feel terrible even if I was with somebody else? That doesn't change the air quality, etc. But who knows? However, it is not lost on me that Randonautica is all tied up with this phenomenon and this set of experiences with the Hellgate. Like, it has sent me there repeatedly, and I think that's worth noticing, especially because of the meme-like aspect of my experience of like despair or depression in that location. All right, so that's everything I have to say for now about memetics, the despair meme, and their potential relation to my experiences at the Hellgate. If you use Randonautica, I would really love to hear if you have any experiences of the despair meme, or just like if you've had any interesting randonauting experiences. I've already talked to one person since the last episode who has also encountered synchronicity alongside not randonauting, but telling someone about randonauting, which is really interesting. So I really want to hear if other people have experienced that as well. And next time, I'm going to do a deep dive into more of my own experiences of randonauting weirdness. So keep an eye out for that. And in the meantime, you can follow me on Instagram at Buried Secrets Podcast if you want to see what I'm up to. You can check out the show notes at buriedSecretsPodcast.com. There you'll find the sources as well as my script for this episode. If you liked this episode, please tell your friends about it. Please rate and review on your podcatcher of choice, but especially Apple, Spotify, or Podchaser. That really helps other people find the podcast. And also, I have a Patreon now. So if you go to patreon.com/buriedsecretspodcast, you can check that out. I've got the Solo Estes Method kit. I've got the map of haunted New York City, which actually I had kind of a fun experience this weekend. Yesterday, I was hanging out with Abby from the Lunatics Radio Hour, which if you don't listen to that podcast, you gotta check them out. But we were walking around Astoria, and I was giving her kind of like my tour of Astoria cemeteries, which I've done a whole series about a year ago. I did a big series about hidden cemeteries in Astoria. And so we were going around Astoria looking at these cemeteries, and I went to Google Maps because I wanted to double check the address of Lawrence Family Cemetery. And I realized that I had, tested my Google map of haunted New York City on my phone, and I guess I had added it to my Google map. So it was actually really convenient because as we were walking around the neighborhood, I was able to, of course, I know a decent amount of stuff off the top of my head, but my memory's not the most amazing memory. And I was able to look at the Google map on my Maps app and do a much more thorough tour for us, because I was like, okay, cool. Like I put, quotes from an article about this weird mountain of rubble and debris up in northern Astoria, and here's the story behind that. And like when we went to the Lint Riker Smith homestead, I was able to, read a little bit from the information I had put in the map. So it's actually, if you live in New York City, it's kind of a fun resource for like a self-guided tour of haunted things in New York City. So that is there. I also want to curate a digital library of cool public domain books, so things about the paranormal and occult, things about weird history and New York City history, etc. There's so much cool stuff in the public domain, but it's so hard to find things if someone hasn't kind of already curated it for you. So I thought, probably every week or so, I would add a title to what I'm calling the secret library, which I'll be sharing on Patreon. So for the first title that I want to put in the secret library, I'm going to put up a Victorian ghost hunting book that was written by a woman. So that'll be on Patreon by the time this goes up. I will say, disclaimer, I haven't read this entire book. I've read bits and pieces, but I've heard really great things about it. And this book was, I believe, forgotten for a long time, but it has recently enjoyed a resurgence of popularity, at least in the corner of the paranormal community that I inhabit. So you may have heard of this book, but if not, you can check out patreon.com/buried secrets podcast to get a link to the secret library, and for this book I'll put up a EPUB and a Mobi version, so general ebook format and then the ebook format for Kindle, so that way whatever you're reading it on, it's easy to read on that. So check that out on Patreon. I might add something else this week as well. It kind of depends on how the week goes, but I'll definitely at least upload that book. All right, that's all I've got to say this time. I'll be back next week with more weird randonauting stories. Thanks so much for listening.